So I think that the question how mind fits into nature or how mind relates to matter in the way that we are used to asking it right now is completely ill-posed on many different fronts. So let me begin, for saying something about, the book title, Why the World Does Not Exist. What I'm denying is the metaphysical principle of the unity of reality. So for one thing, I believe it's philosophically misguided to believe that there's one big entity or domain, the world, and that we have to fit everything into that domain, which would be defined, for instance, as the absolute totality of everything which exists. And then you could start debating about, what really exists? Does mind really exist? Does matter really exist, etc.? If that's the way of approaching the topic, then you're already misguided because you make way too many metaphysical assumptions that I think are ultimately untenable. So first of all, I think we have to overcome metaphysics, and therefore also questions such as, should we be dualist? That is, should we believe that there are two kinds of substances? Should we be monist? That is, believe that there's just one substance? Should we be pluralist? That is, believe that there are many substances, okay? So I think the early modern debates that are still with us and that have posed the problem of consciousness the way that we're still discussing it, I think those debates are as misguided as early modern physics. So all of this is misguided. We need a new framework in order to ask the question. Nevertheless, there are versions of the question that are with us that are tenable, but you have to rephrase the premises of the debate, or so I believe. So let's look, for instance, at notions like mind and consciousness and self-consciousness, etc. What's remarkable if you come from a different, like non-English-speaking community, such as a German-speaking community, is how surprising it is, like we have no German word for what in English is called mind. You cannot translate mind into English as much as you cannot translate the German word Geist into English, okay? They're not exact synonyms. So I have a hard time even understanding what people mean when they ask, mind and matter. Mind for me is like schmeint, so you have to give it meaning. And when I look at, the meaning that people are trying to give it, then philosophers at least will tell you something like, if you want to know what mind is, you got to find the mark of the mental. What's the mark of the mental? Well, the mark of the mental is what makes something mental instead of non-mental. Well, that's of course not very helpful because mental is just Latin for mind, so that doesn't really get us anywhere. So what they then say, and that is still the most hopeful way of even making sense of the question, I think, is they say something like, yeah, forget about mind, let's talk about consciousness. And then things get really tricky because I think that consciousness might also mean all sorts of things. Some things that we call consciousness, I think, are of course biological phenomena, such as being awake. The fact that I'm awake right now and not, so drunk that I can't even engage in a debate. Well, those facts, I'm not on LSD, for all I know, those facts are biological, obviously. So I don't think there's a mind-matter problem there. First of all, we can explain them, etc. So I don't believe that there's what people have called the heart problem. I don't think that you can look at my brain and then it looks stupid and just pink, but from within, I'm awake. So how do they relate to each other? Well, here's how they relate to each other. If your brain is in a certain state, then you are awake. So that's I think is not a problem. But there are problems with consciousness, such as how can I ever be in a truth-apt state? I think that's an interesting question. So how can brains have access to truth-apt states, even though brains, do not seem particularly suited to, due to their evolutionary origin, etc., to grasping, as it were, pure truth, such as 2 + 2 = 4, etc. So how is it possible that brains, realize states that make it possible for us to significantly go beyond anything that takes place within our heads? So, to throw out another credo, the external is credo, but a little bit more generalized, I think that, parts of consciousness just ain't in the head. So if you're looking for consciousness, within your skull, then you will find some elements of what we legitimately call consciousness, and they are not mysterious. But you will also find, other features that we ascribe to consciousness, such as, those features that put us in contact with something outside our skulls. So for me, the real interesting question is, how is it possible for organisms to grasp propositions? I think that's an interesting question that comes with all sorts of riddles, but the riddles are quite different from those that the metaphysical framework is allowed to pose within which we are currently operating. I think that framework is profoundly confused.